All right, everyone, welcome back into another NFL props video. Gonna be touching on the top prop bets for week 13 on both PrizePicks and Underdog. Let's go in and get into it. So finally, last Thursday was a pretty awesome primetime game. It seems like none of those had really went as Vegas had expected, and honestly, that's what happened last on Thursday as well. But it was nice. We were getting some pretty good lines on some anytime TDs for CeeDee Lamb and also Tony Pollard that were available on Underdog. And then they actually shifted it to a rush and receiving touchdown. And then PrizePicks actually made it available for an anytime TD prop, where as previously it was flipped around. So kind of weird, but it was nice. Had a good day on both slates. Hopefully we can continue that trend this week. And so again, I'm going to go through the game by game preview for all the Sunday early games and also the afternoon game. So looking at the first game, we got the Broncos versus the Texans. Tank Dell is expected to play in this one. We do know that Dalton Schultz is going to be out in this game. We'll see what that means for targets, because someone like maybe Robert Woods gets a little bit more involved. Maybe Nico Collins gets a couple more his way. I don't think we're going to see the backup tight end really be that involved. I could be wrong there. Looking at the Denver Broncos, they are seemingly good to go. The question is whether or not they can keep up the great play that they have had. And so we take a peek at the Houston Texans. Very interesting one here for Devin Singletary for over his receiving yards. We can see Underdog has set at 10.5, which is seemingly the correct line when you compare it against the average sportsbook line, where they have set about 10.9. Now, last week, Devin Singletary ruined some of my slips because he was heavily involved in the passing game. And going against Denver, who has still been bad against opposing running backs, like I expect him to be involved in the passing game again in this one. The fact that and it was so tilting, like what the heck? Like literally the best game that he's probably had in like 3 years in the receiving game. So tilting there. But maybe that's a sign of things to come. Like he probably is a little bit of a better pass catcher out of the backfield than is Dameon Pierce. Now, I still think Agumawale is probably the best out of them, but he's not going to get playing time, so that doesn't matter. And my expectation was that Devin Singletary would lose the majority of the snaps. He did not. He was still at 80% of the snaps. So if that is something that continues and Dameon Pierce continues to not get that much work, only 20% of the snaps, now that could be a situation where it was just his first game back from an injury. That could be the case. And then it was a little bit more of a shootout, so they wanted to trust the, pass catching back a little bit more. That could very well be the case. That being said, maybe we just do roll with Singletary for over 9.5 receiving yards. That is simply going to be a pretty good one on the slate right now. I did mention that I do think maybe we do see other receptions go other ways for receivers. And what I mean by that is with Dalton Schultz being out, who had been playing about 80 or so % of the snaps, maybe we see Robert Woods get a little bit more work instead of Brevin Jordan. Maybe Nico Collins gets a couple more targets. And I would say the lines that we're getting on both Nico and Tank Dell for receptions does seem to be a little bit too low, 4.5 for both of them. The data doesn't think so. But all in all, I think that those are some decent edges that we have. Let's go ahead and get into Denver as well. I will say, I thought Cortland Sutton's receptions prop at 4.5 was also one that I thought was a little bit too low. Cortland Sutton is a self-pat on the back. While people are trying to gas up Jerry Jeudy throughout his whole career, I just kept saying, when healthy, Cortland Sutton's easily the receiver number one there. And that seems to be true now. I think that's confirmed, especially in this offense, it seems like, with Russell Wilson. Now, I do think it's still shocking that Marvin Mims, who's kind of more of a Tyler Lockett type player, has not been involved. Obviously, Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett coexisted pretty well together. But all in all, I think Cortland Sutton, if this game is going to be maybe a potential shootout, which who knows, then we are going to see Cortland Sutton probably get a lot of targets, and then maybe he gets a couple more receptions. The concern is that he typically doesn't get over 4.5 receptions. They are very much trying to rush the football. So if this was a prop bet that you guys liked, then you'd want to be betting probably the under rush attempts for someone like Javonte Williams. And we are seeing right now that at 15.5, that is seemingly a decent one that we are getting only about a 52% chance to hit. But I would say these two correlate pretty well in the sense that if he's getting over 15.5 rush attempts, they were able to establish the run, and then this would probably be the under. And then vice versa. If they can't get the rushing game going, then Cortland Sutton should be heavily targeted. And maybe if his targets are at 6, that probably has a chance to be a push. Probably not touching that. But let's go and move on into the next game. And so looking at the next game, it's going to be the Dolphins versus the Commanders, a 9-point spread, but it is going to be a pretty high scoring game at about 49. So the biggest piece of injury news that we have is that De'Von is expected back. Now, I had for a while been saying that I thought him and Mostert would coexist pretty well together. We just haven't really seen that. I mean, we have like a 2-game sample size where that seemed to be true. It's tough to say though. And it's so weird, for whatever reason, Mostert has not been able to get going in the first half and then just crushes in the second half. Maybe that's something that continues again in this game. It's super strange. Looking at the Commanders, nothing too crazy injury-wise. We go on and take a peek at the props that we're getting. Tua, again, rush yards, I don't really care for that. Pass attempts at 34. Again, I don't know if I really love that. We might see a higher dosage in the run game. And so this is an interesting line, I would say, for Mostert. Like, I do still expect him to be involved in the rush game, especially with Achane proven that he can't stay healthy for now. But all in all, really, the props that we're getting for Miami right now do all seem to be a little bit too thin. Let's just take a quick peek, though, at the snaps from when Achane was active. And so this game against Buffalo, I don't know if you guys remember it, like Mostert had 2 sloppy fumbles, and then Achane got heavily involved. Against New York, that was the game Achane got injured, but he played 48% of the snaps or so. Mostert was the lead back there. And then the game against Denver, Mostert was the lead back, but the thing is, he's definitely going to cut into Mostert's workload. That is a definite thing. The thing is, though, that they are going to be on the field together a decent amount. Where we have seen maybe Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill doing some end arounds, we're probably just going to see Achane do that a little bit more, and that could actually lead to more open lanes for Mostert as they have to account for Achane speed on those end arounds a little bit more, which I think hopefully will lead to Mostert having more production in the first half, because it's been weird. All in all, that's the best bet that I think we have in this game. All in all, I probably just don't want to touch it. Maybe Tua for over completions at 22.5. We can see the projection data has it set at 24.5. The Air Sportsbook line has it as a little bit of the under at 23.5. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the Commanders. And yeah, this is one that I kind of like. So Logan Thomas for 3.5 receptions. It's a little bit ugly because I kind of hate trusting opposing tight ends, but he is playing a decent amount. He's playing almost 70% of the snap, and he's getting targeted enough. And then you go against Miami, who obviously this is supposed to be a high scoring game, not exactly a matchup that you're worried about for opposing tight ends. And so if he gets 4 targets or even 5 targets, I do expect him to get over 3.5 receptions. All in all, yeah, it's probably the best bet that we have in this game. From there, Brian Robinson for under receiving yards at 12.5. With Antonio Gibson back, you kind of expect him to be more involved in the passing game. I believe this Curtis Samuel prop was one that was gaining some hype for the over. The data is kind of saying bet the under. That's probably one that I want to just stay away from in general. Rush attempts for Brian Robinson is definitely just dependent on the game flow. If you want to place a bet saying that Washington does keep it close, I mean, this is the NFL. Weird stuff happens all the time. That would seemingly be a free square if they keep it close. Again, it's a 9-point spread. That's not expected. From there, you know, a little bit too thin for all the props that we're getting. Let's go ahead and move on into the next game. So looking at the next game that we have the Colts versus the Titans. 1-point spread, 42 for the over and under. The big news is that Jonathan Taylor is listed out, okay? That is going to lead to Zach Moss probably getting a workhorse workload. Now, he is going against the Titans, which is a more difficult matchup. That being said, he has been able to do well against. I do want to call it that Treylon Burks is expected back, and I think that could be a big thing for Will Levis. Like, Will Levis has kind of been missing that player. I think if someone like Treylon Burks is there who can open it up a little bit more down the field, that could mean that Will Levis is in for a slightly better game, especially if they're able to establish the run. And so we look at Derrick Henry. He was heavily involved in that matchup against Carolina. Now, it started off slow and then he got going, but 20 opportunities, 18 on the ground game. And there's just a heavy correlation between Will Levis doing good enough in terms of the pass catchers when they're able to establish the run. And I will say, like, eventually Tajay Spears is going to have a breakout game, and it's going to come when Derrick Henry doesn't have a good game on the ground. I don't expect that here. Maybe later on the season. But Will Levis, didn't exactly dominate last game by any means, but he played his role very well. And he was able to get the ball down the field to his pass catchers. And so that's something where, like Treylon Burks, I could see having a big catch down the field. And so I'm curious as to if we're not getting any good prop bets for Treylon Burks. We probably aren't getting any for him just yet. Yeah, we're not. But he's probably the one I'd want to trust the most. We do see that DeAndre Hopkins receiving yards is at 51.5. That's seemingly a little bit too low on PrizePicks. And then looking at Tajay Spears, unfortunately, the under receiving yards is one that's kind of being heavily favored, as is Derrick Henry. And again, I do think that this is going to be a game where they do try to establish the run on the ground. Maybe there's something there. I am so tilted at myself last week. Typically speaking, guys, whenever there's a good spot for a player, I'll always just hammer the fantasy score props. And I think the first time all year, I was like, you know what? I don't know if we can trust Derrick Henry to score a touchdown. Let's do rush plus receiving yards. He didn't have a catch. He scored 2 touchdowns. I was so mad at myself. That was definitely a mental error on my part. Apologies there. And he could be an option for a fantasy score prop. Again, I think they'll be able to establish the run. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the Colts. And so again, with the Colts, I think we're going to just expect what we saw really the last time they played Tennessee, where Zach Moss is probably going to get 80% of the work. Now, Zach Moss is strange. Like, he is, I don't know, it's like tough to say. Like, he's not, when you watch it, it's not like good, but he keeps producing good results. It's like the strangest thing. And he really dominated against Tennessee the last time out. Now, Tennessee is good against the rush, so that was super strange. I just don't know what we can expect from Zach Moss again. He probably will get work in the passing game. And if there's one thing that we know about the Colts, they have been able to have their running backs be very successful on the ground, whether it's Zach Moss, whether it's Jonathan Taylor. So maybe there's something there. And so for Zach Moss rush yards, I don't know if I want to touch that. I think I'd rather do a fantasy score prop for him. It's probably going to be at like 11 or so, maybe 12. I'd probably be fine betting the over there. We can see a decent prop line difference here between Underdog and PrizePicks. PrizePicks, you'd obviously want to bet the over. Underdog, you probably want to bet the under. Decent middling opportunity there. 3 yards, although it might not seem like much, it kind of is. So not a terrible bet there, but all in all, we're probably not getting the many good props here. We are seeing Gardner Minshew for over 25.5 pass completions at about 53% likely to hit. I don't know if I exactly love that, to be honest with you guys. It's just not that good, you know. Michael Pittman Jr. is someone you would expect to have another good game, though. Like Minshew has been able to get the football to him. A lot of people are expecting Josh Downs to have a good game. 13 targets in the last game, didn't really do much with it. Against Tennessee the last time out, did have a pretty productive game. And so, yeah, if he is going to be getting that many targets, that much work again, you could see it. But I really think that this is going to be a ground and pound type game. And so I don't know if I want to touch any other props like this receiving yards one. Again, I think a lot of people are chasing that, which they could. Maybe we have a fantasy score prop there for them where it's at like 10.5 and we're fine betting the over. But right now, I don't love it. Don't hate it, but don't love it. Moving on to the next game here, we got the Cards versus the Steelers. Steelers, 6-point favorites. Wow, right? That's because the Cardinals are banged up. It's a 41 for the over and under. Looking at the card, they're without Michael Wilson, Marquise Brown questionable, Trey McBride I think is not expected to play. And so we could see Rondale Moore, and also Greg Dortch. I don't think we're going to get that many prop bets for them. I do just want to call out Greg Dortch, who when Greg Dortch has gotten the playing time, Kyler Murray loves throwing him the football. And so the last 2 weeks, he's seen about 80% of the snaps, like Rondale Moore, but I believe Dortch is playing out of the slot a little bit more. And so with that, we had seen that lead to 9 and 8 targets. And I think we could maybe count on that again. And so if we get news that Marquise Brown is out, hasn't been practicing, that's going to be more targets going his way. And then also Trey McBride, who's currently questionable. They just released Zach Ertz. That could lead to, I don't even know, Elijah Higgins getting snaps. Like Kyler Murray is going to be targeting Greg Dortch early and often, I would say, in that scenario. Maybe Zach Pasquale's back, but who cares? Rondale Moore also would probably need to get heavy targets in this game. All in all, I don't know if we're getting any props for them. I don't know why we would be. Maybe Kyler Murray. Trey McBride we are, so they are kind of expecting him to play. Yeah, I mean, if Marquise Brown sits is another spot, I guess, where Trey McBride would probably get targeted heavily. And if he sits, like, who cares, right? It's just going to be a DNP. I guess, yeah, I like the over 4.5 receptions here. Not the best matchup against Pittsburgh. We know that. But, man, if he's like the only healthy body besides Greg Dortch, probably going to get there. Do want to mention, like, James Conner probably will have to be involved in the passing game as well. I'm very curious to see where his receptions prop comes out to be on PrizePicks or Underdog. And for what it's worth, Underdog does have some props out there for like fantasy score. Maybe not a terrible option for him. They're going to need him involved. And actually, this receiving yards one, I probably would be fine betting the over there. Again, if Marquise Brown is out, it's a little bit dependent on that, but he should have a good game. And I'm actually curious, do they have Greg Dortch at all? Don't. Okay. So yeah, I don't mind Trey McBride over 4.5 receptions, and I don't mind on Underdog, James Conner over 9.5 receiving. And then on the opposite side of the football, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. A prop bet that I do like is Najee Harris for over 13.5 rushing attempts. Again, if they are favorited by that much, the Cardinals 9 points, Najee Harris is someone that we should be looking at. And overall fantasy score as well, we can see this is a data point that I added in there. We saw that this was very fruitful for us on Thursday Night Football with CeeDee Lamb and also Tony Pollard. He has a 54% likelihood to score a touchdown in this game. And just as an FYI, guys, this prop for PrizePicks is listed typically as pass, rush, plus receiving. And so for Najee Harris, we can take a peek. Has scored a touchdown in 3 out of the past 4 games. This is going to be his best matchup, though, in a long, long time. And Najee Harris has kind of been the source of frustration, it seems like, for a lot of fans and whatnot that maybe hadn't been watching film. Like, he does look good. It's just Jaylen Warren also looks really good. It's kind of been, I don't know, people tend to favor the backups in those situations. I mean, I get it's more fun, but he looks good. And 13.5 rush attempps, I don't mind. The rushing touchdown prop, I don't mind. All in all, maybe we're getting a good fantasy score for him on Underdog. We are 9.2. I'm going to take a peek at that. And that is seemingly one of the better prop bets that we are getting. Again, he's favored to score a touchdown, so it makes a lot of sense. And that honestly is probably too low, guys. Again, he's favored to score a touchdown, so you kind of project that in there. Then you tack on this, that's 11 points. All in all, to me, it's going to be tough not to like Jaylen Warren. I do want to call George Pickens was also someone that's popping up there for the Steelers. We'll touch on that. Kyler Murray on the flip side under fantasy. Maybe have a little bit of a game stack there. Kyler Murray under fantasy score. George Pickens over. Najee Harris over. Kenny Pickett over as well. Wow. Some decent projected edges. And heck, maybe I should just be using underdog right now since they had the props out. And let's take a peek. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much they're liking the over fantasy score for all these guys. I mean, I get it. It's a great matchup. It makes a lot of sense. I think I'm going to run out a little bit of a stack here. And yeah, I think I might do that, guys. Like maybe one up Pickens or Deontay Johnson for over fantasy score. I don't know if I want to bank on both of them, but Najee makes a ton of sense. And then obviously it correlates pretty well. Like the projection data likes Pickens and Deontay Johnson to have good games. So it would make sense why Kenny Pickett would get his over fantasy score. You could do all of those and then potentially just do Kyler Murray under fantasy score. Maybe do an insured slip on that. So if one of them misses, you're still getting a decent payout. That's typically the strategy to go with on underdog anyway. You could also do James Conner, I guess, as well. Receiving yards, I would say that correlates well, like if he needs to get involved in the passing game. Moving on to the next game, the Jets versus the Falcons. Oh, this is probably going to be an ugly game. I don't want to talk down on Desmond Ridder like he is an upgrade from Taylor Heineke somehow. This is going to be an ugly quarterback, right? I don't think we're questioning that. Do you want to call it? Cook is currently questionable. If he were to sit, I think we could just expect Breece Hall to even get more work, but he's also questionable. And another one of their backups is also questionable, so who knows? Now, I will say Hall was a full participant. He's expected to play. And if he plays, I think we're just expecting that normal snap share that he has been getting. Also worth calling out, we're getting a lot more props for Jeremy receiving wise. And it's so weird. I've been touting Tyler Conklin a bunch this season simply because Zach Wilson was his quarterback. For some reason, Zach Wilson loves throwing him the football. And now we're getting props for the backup tight end in this game. It's strange. So let's take a peek at the New York Jets. I don't think we're going to love anything here. Now, we did see Garrett Wilson was a decent option. Now, it's not the best matchup against Atlanta, but there's one thing about Atlanta. For some reason, they've been able to make terrible quarterbacks look pretty good, or decent quarterbacks look great. Garrett Wilson. The one thing about Tim Boyle, when he was with the Lions, I believe it was St. Brown there. I think St. Brown actually saw an increase in fantasy production. Anyways, we saw that last week with Garrett Wilson as well. And so obviously he scored a touchdown. You can't really bank on that, but even still 7 receptions, 44 yards. I can see why the over fantasy score is at least popping there on underdog. We are seeing that the under receptions though is also one that's popping up. That's because the line is set at 5.5. We are not getting any receptions for PrizePicks. Yeah, they're a little bit slower getting that stuff. And so I mentioned the backup tight end. We see at 1.5 receptions is one. I don't know if I want to touch that, guys. And then from there, the Jets props that we're getting, not that good. So we'll take a peek at Atlanta. Atlanta has clearly been a source of frustration for the fantasy community, specifically with Bijan Robinson. And we are seeing that, again, the fantasy score props for Kyle Pitts and Drake London are both being favorited for the over. And I don't know if they move around Drake London enough in the offense. They have been, actually. Don't get me wrong. That's happened the last 2 weeks. And actually, now I think about it, this actually might be a pretty darn good prop bet. That's the one thing about the Jets defense is that when you're moving your receivers around a little bit, they are going to be more involved. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill both had pretty good games against the Jets simply because of that. And so he's been someone that's operating out of the slot a little bit more. Maybe there's something to that. I would say Data really likes both of them. I'd probably just want to go with one of them. And maybe, it's tough to say. Like, I get why people wouldn't want to bet on Kyle Pitts. This is probably going to be a game in which Bijan Robinson just gets a ton of carries, and probably even Tyler Algier a little bit. But all in all, I think we can expect a heavy dosage of Bijan Robinson in this game. Hopefully he can get about 70% of the snaps. Worth calling out that Cordero Patterson been a little bit more involved as well lately. But for what it's worth, guys, the reason why the Data likes Kyle Pitts for over fantasy score, I think it's rooted in the fact that he's projected to get 2.5 or 2.7, and that's a good EV bet that we have right now. But all in all, guys, like I do feel like the lines that we are getting for Robinson are pretty low considering the matchup with the Jets, where clear teams are just trying to establish the running. And so moving on into the next game, we have the Lions versus the Saints. Only a 4.5 for the spread, 47 for the over and under. Looking at it right now, Lions are good to go. It's just really, both teams, it really depends on the quarterback play. Jared Goff been struggling the last 2 games. The thing with Jared Goff is when you get pressure on him, he's just not all that good. When he doesn't get pressure, we see he's clearly pretty darn good. Derek Carr is kind of just his own worst enemy. Now, this week, I find the line strange because they're going to be without Rashid Shaheed, potentially Chris Olave. Heck, their place kicker has an injury. And then they're already without Michael Thomas. Now, one of my favorite calls from last week was that A.T. Perry would have a good game. That did not happen. Okay, only 2 targets. Again, Derek Carr was terrible. We did see Shaheed had 5 targets in that game, and I think that's going to go to A.T. Perry's way. And then if Chris Olave's out, who he suffered a concussion, I don't think we're expecting him to play. There's only been like a couple of players that had gotten a concussion the previous week and played. And so I think I'm just expecting A.T. Perry to really get a heavy dosage of the work. That being said, we're probably expecting Taysom Hill to maybe play a little bit more, maybe get used a little bit more uniquely, but I think it's going to be a Juwan Johnson game. I really do. At the beginning of the season, there's a lot of hype around him, especially with the chemistry for Derek Carr. Being injured, he was never involved too much. I mean, 5 targets in a couple of the games, like you like that, but 7 targets finally last week. And so I think that's something we could bank on. You saw Tucker Kraft have a good game against the Lions last week, and maybe that's something we're looking at again this week. So I don't want to set myself up for confirmation bias, but I'm kind of hoping for good lines on Juwan Johnson. For underdog, we're not getting that. Any props really, probably because of that news. We'll take a peek here at PrizePicks, and same thing. Again, I do think Juwan Johnson has a good game. I think A.T. Perry is going to have a good game as well. A.T. Perry is someone that stood out in the preseason, did get a lot of snaps last week, as did Juwan Johnson. Like, those are probably my 2, just as an FYI. So on the flip side of the football, one of the players that's heavily expected to score a touchdown is actually David Montgomery. I'll show you guys that here in a second. Looking at the prop bets that we're getting, last week, it was part of the success on Thursday Night Football was Khalif Raymond for over receiving yards. It was at a low number, and then Jameson Williams for over receiving yards as well. That worked out. Worked out because my Green Bay Packers dominated the Lions. And it's weird. Like, that wasn't a fluky win for the Packers. It's kind of concerning for the Lions. Maybe they peaked a little bit too soon this season, although I do expect them to win this game. I'm looking at the snap counts here. Like, Raymond getting 30% of the snaps. I don't think we want Chase and over receiving yards, even though he's been involved when he's on the field. I don't know if I want to touch that. Josh Reynolds not playing as many snaps lately as well. Jameson Williams been a little bit too hit or miss. He is getting open. All in all, the funnel in this offense is clearly St. Brown and Laporta. They have 2 high target shares. And then Jahmyr Gibbs continues to play well. And so really, I don't think I want to touch any of these secondary options in this game against Derek Carr, who has not looked good. Like last week, it made sense to chase those. I don't think it makes sense to chase those this week. So let's go and take a peek at it from Underdog. And then, yeah, we're seeing Laporta for over fantasy score. Pretty crazy there. And this is kind of fascinating. So I mentioned David Montgomery was actually favored to get the over rushing touchdown. That might have adjusted because his under fantasy score is being heavily favored there. And I would say if Jahmyr Gibbs is going to continue to get that much work, maybe there's something to that because then this line would be too high. Interest. St. Brown, they're saying it's a little bit too high. And then, yeah, Sam Laporta for how much involved he's been for as many snaps as he's playing for his target share. I'm fine betting the over there. I really am. So it's seemingly another good prop bet that we have there for Laporta. And so now we go ahead and get into the next game. Chargers versus the Patriots, a game in which fascinating because Keenan Allen could potentially sit. I'm expecting him to play, but I'm surprised that we're getting some of the prop bets that we're getting with the potential of Keenan Allen sitting because like Gerald Everett, Jalen Guyton, and even Johnston would probably get more work. And they have low reception totals. Now, it's an ugly game. I think we're expecting a heavy dosage of Stevenson and potentially Austin Eckler. I think we could see a little bit more of Joshua Kelly in this game as well, especially if Keenan Allen is banged up, where you just got to get your playmakers on the field. I'm not saying that Kelly's a big playmaker, but all in all, they might need to get him a little bit more involved if Keenan Allen is out. And so we see the snaps for them last week against Baltimore, a more difficult matchup. Jalen Guyton played a bunch. Johnston, not so much. Now, he did get injured in that game, so tough to say for sure. I think we're going to expect him to get closer to 70 or so percent of the snaps. Gerald Everett came in and instantly played 60% of the snaps. I think that should be the expectation in this game. And then Gerald Everett last week got 4 targets in that game and 4 receptions. Again, if Keenan Allen's banged up or just not 100% or sits out, I think he's going to be a big beneficiary. He did log a limited practice on Friday, which obviously is a good thing. But Jalen Guyton, who had 5 targets in that game, I expect him to probably get his over 2.5 receptions, again, especially if Keenan Allen's out. Now, let's see what the data says about that. And yeah, with Keenan Allen being banged up, we're seeing maybe the under fantasy score for all 3 of these guys. Maybe there's something to that. A lot of the unders being favored right now. Fascinating there. Let's take a peek at it from PrizePicks because they are the ones that are giving us those other props. And so yeah, Jalen Guyton, we are seeing the under being favored there. Again, if Keenan Allen's out, that could shift. I do expect him to play, but it is Keenan Allen who has a long injury history, so maybe they're conservative with him. And then Gerald Everett's receiving yards, I don't know, that seems too low to me. The data says it's about a 50-50% chance. For the Patriots, I mentioned I think it's going to be a Stevenson game. He has been someone that has been playing better. And with DeMario Douglas out, they're just going to need to get him involved in the passing game. So I really like the over 21.5 for receiving yards because he's probably their best pass catching option. I mean, Hunter Henry has been good this season, but with Pop Douglas out, it's ugly. It really is. And I'm wondering if maybe Ty Montgomery does a little bit more work as a receiver in this game, potentially. It's ugly, guys. Like Parker should be able to to get this over. I actually don't mind Stevenson for over 14.5 rush attempts as well. Like, we have seen Stevenson snaps kind of go up recently, and that needs to continue. So that's where I think I like the over there. And just looking at it compared to underdog guys, like, that's a big edge that we're getting for Stevenson, whether it's receiving yards or rushing at 60.5. And the Chargers just let the Packers kind of rush against them as well. Not the best rush game lately. And like, that's the thing. Stevenson's been able to kind of crush in easier matchups. So whether it's in the receiving game or rush, I guess I like the rushing a little bit more on PrizePicks. That seems to be a pretty good edge there. It's probably one of my favorite ones right now. So moving on to the next game, we got the Panthers versus the Bucks, a game that I expect to be ugly, and so does Vegas. 36.4 for the over and under, 5-point spread. We got Chris Godwin questionable. If he sits or his production's hindered, it's going to mean Trey Palmer is going to step up. All in all, Baker has not been able to give them football too much. Kind of crazy. Looking at the Panthers, you would kind of hope that Bryce Young is going to have a good game. That's what needs to happen, really, I think, for him. It's a good matchup going against the Bucs. And so we're going to see here that I think it's because of the matchup, we're going to see a lot of the over fantasy points being favorited for Bryce Young. Now, PrizePicks went ahead and bumped this up to 12.5. I think it was at 11.5 or so for them. I actually like this. I think there's some correlation there. Bet Adam Thielen over fantasy score, bet Bryce Young over fantasy score on this site. If you want to bet the unders on PrizePicks, it does also make sense, but there should be correlation there. This is a good matchup. You also have Jonathan Mingo for over 2.5 receptions. You also have Chuba Hubbard for over 2.5 receptions. I'm bringing that up because it is a good matchup going against the Bucs. Like, this feels like a must play well situation for the panic not to go off. Now, I will say Chuba Hubbard, don't love his talent. Like, I think we're going to continue to see some more Miles Sanders like we have been, but he did see his snaps go down a little bit last week. And so if that continues, then yeah, Chuba Hubbard over his receptions would bode well. You see Jonathan Mingo, who has been more involved, 2.5 receptions. I'm fine with that. Like, we have some pretty good correlation there. And obviously it's a very good matchup. So I'm fine with that on underdog. We'll toss in Tampa Bay for underdog, and then I'll show you guys PrizePicks. Mike Evans over fantasy score. I'm fine with that. I think we would rather just go with receptions. A little bit touchdown dependent there. Trey Palmer, again, if Chris Godwin's out, then he's going to be this should almost be a lock to hit. Pull in both prop bets for both teams. We are seeing Baker under fantasy score against Carolina. It's a difficult matchup. Interesting there. Kate on under fantasy score, so that would correlate with Baker not getting his over. And then, yeah, it's funny. We're seeing the under fantasy score here then for Bryce Young on PrizePicks. So I would say you can do it both ways. Honestly, we're like a 1-point edge. Maybe not much to a lot of people, but it really is. So now we move on into the next game. We got the Cleveland Browns versus the Rams. So Joe Flacco starting this game. It's a 4-point spread, 40 for the over and under. The Browns are a great defense. And so I was hammering Kyren Williams in DFS last week. I felt like he was way under-owned than he should be, and that ended up working out. I don't know what to do this week because the Browns are just a phenomenal and yeah, it's super tough. Like, Puka, you would expect to be able to get over 4.5 receptions in this game. I don't think we're going to see that much of Royce Freeman. Like, Kyren Williams, I kind of do expect to get over 14.5 rush attempts, and I still think he's going to have a good game. It's all a little bit too tight. We'll take a peek at Cleveland. All in all, you would almost think that I was going to say Jerome Ford and probably Amari Cooper would get a slight bump. Jerome Ford for over 2.5 receptions is fascinating. Let's take a peek at that. And what I want to see is the snaps, because in the middle of the season we saw Strong get a little bit more work, and he hasn't been lately. So as long as Ford is still getting that heavy workload, by all means, let's go in and target them. And so that's going to be one I'm going to write down, because again, if he's playing that much snaps, that's really the bet, is how many snaps he's going to play. And if he's playing over 60%, especially with check down Flacco, let's remember that. I think that's awesome. That's an awesome prop. And then just going to take a peek at both of the teams on underdog, Rams and then Browns. Basically more of the same stuff. Again, I think I like Kyren Williams. So let's go and move on into the next game. We got the Niners versus the Eagles, and this is the last game on the slate. I'll be covering the primetime games on a separate video. Looking at it at 47 for the over and under, 3-point spread. This is probably everyone's favorite game to potentially stack. Let's go in and get into it. We know that Dallas Goedert's still doubtful. We'll see what happens. A lot of people are calling for Zach Ertz to go there. Definitely would be fascinating. So get Philly. I do still think that with Dallas Goedert out, I still want to be targeting Devonta Smith. And this is super fascinating. To me, this is telling us where the under fantasy score is being under for Jalen Hurts, but it's over for AJ Brown and also Smith. To me, that's telling me they're not expecting him to get a rushing touch. It's honestly super crazy how fluky, I don't want to say fluky, but really fluky how many rushing touchdowns he has. Like, for that exact scenario to keep hitting the way it has, Devonta Smith on the 1 yard line, or just like pass interference stuff, or just random stuff like that. It's crazy. So yeah, I would say eventually that's due to regress. You take away those 2 points or so that he gets on a rushing touchdown as compared to a passing touchdown, or maybe Swift rushes it in, or Kenneth Gainwell does, I could agree with that. I will say I still like Devonta Smith, probably a little bit more over AJ Brown, but AJ Brown is now due to have a good game. The data is saying that they're both are going to be good bets. Let's look at San Francisco. San Francisco, we're seeing over fantasy score for George Kittle. Decent one for Deebo Samuel for over rush yards. Brandon Ayuk over fantasy score. And guys, on both sites, I think we're going to see that same message once PrizePicks comes out with their fantasy score props. We're probably going to want to be stacking this game. And so on Underdog, we do already have a good stacking opportunity. And just showing you guys the props that we have available on this for both. Yeah, it kind of likes Deebo for rush yards. I don't hate that. I don't love that. Receptions for Deebo is actually favored for the under. All in all, it seems like we have a pretty good edge on Underdog. I'll show you guys another stack for Underdog here. So again, I think we're fine doing AJ Brown. I think we're fine doing Smith for over their fantasy score. I would love to attach that with Hurts, but the day is not telling us to, so I'm not going to force that. And then looking at it here, we got Ayuk for over fantasy score, and then George Kittle for over fantasy score. Those are two that we're popping as well. And then let's just take a peek at all the props that we're getting currently as the best bets. Looking at PrizePicks right now, all seemingly pretty good ones here. Najee Harris, anytime rushing touchdown, I think on PrizePicks makes sense, but it's a better bet there on Underdog. Here's a prop bet that kind of correlates as well. Ritter for over pass completions, tied in with Kyle Pitts for over receptions. That should correlate very well. Jerome Ford's one that I like for over his receptions. Logan Thomas is a decent one. So I'll show you guys the PrizePicks bet that I like. So here we go, guys. We did see Najee Harris has about a 54% likely to score a anytime touchdown. Okay, so not a bad one. I do think that this is going to be a better bet for the fantasy score on Underdog because of that. Devin Singletary for over 9.5 receiving yards. On Underdog, this is already set at 10. We are going to see that that is going to be the case for the average sportsbook line as well. He is someone that played so many snaps last week, and this game is somewhat of a shootout projection wise, and so they might need to be involved in the passing game. They like him a little bit more than they do Pierce. Stevenson, so mad. This updated while I was doing the video. Now at 64.5 rush yards. So mad because the should have paused and made the bet. It was at 60 during the video. They updated it. I still think that that's a good line. Obviously not as big of an edge. And then Jerome Ford over 2.5 receptions. I'm perfectly fine with. If he's going to be playing that many snaps, that's awesome. And that's really the bet here with all these guys, with these. And heck, they're all running backs. Interesting. With these three, we're really just betting on those increased snaps that they have seen recently to continue. And then we're just really hoping that Jaylen Warren doesn't get like more on, although Najee is probably the best option to score a touchdown for the Steelers. And so here's the bet for Underdog. Sam Laporta is actually one of the best ones for over fantasy score. Again, if Najee Harris is going to be scoring a touchdown, we are banking on that here, but at the same time, maybe gets a few receptions, maybe gets this over fantasy score without scoring a touchdown as well. Sam Howell was one that popped up as a good EV bet, about a 54% chance for the under to hit here. So all in all, I typically like to run out 3 slip bets on Underdog. I think that this is the best one that we have available right now. Again, if you guys are going to place any bets on Underdog, whether it be the stacks or that slip, and you guys haven't signed up, make sure you use the promo code 905. You get 100% match on deposit up to $100. That's just going to kick back some money my way, and it just helps out the channel out a little bit. But that is going to be all for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. Let's have a good slate. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell as well so you're not missing on any of the great coverage. If you guys want to access any cheat sheets for props, it is available at 95sports.com for $10 a month. Thanks for watching. Let's have a good slate. And as always, let's keep cashing.